And welcome to our session today on games in Lectora. Today we're going to learn how you can easily create games in Lectora that will enable your students to learn and have fun while they're doing it. You can use actions and variables in Lectora, creating fun e-learning games. The best part about these games is that they don't require any programming knowledge. You can make them really exciting and you can make them really interactive. This presentation is not only going to focus on the benefits of utilizing games in e-learning. That's the first thing we'll talk about, is why you should incorporate some of these games into your content. But we're going to show you a variety of options for building your own custom games in Lectora. We're going to focus on the things you need to consider before you start building any of these games into your content. So there's a number of things you want to think about before you just sit down and start developing a game. So we're going to focus on those things you need to think of beforehand. And whether you want to take advantage of the variety of Flash games that are already available in Lectora, or you actually want to build your own customized games, you can do both in Lectora. So there's a lot of options that we want to cover with you today in this topic about games. So this presentation is really meant to get you started thinking about games, how you want to implement them within your course, how you want to build them, how should you build them, etc., that type of thing. Now, with the ability to create your own custom games, or you can choose from almost 20 different Flash games that are already built within Lectora's media library, the sky is the limit as far as what type of game you want to include within your content. So to get started thinking about games, we can build board games, you can build dice games or casino games, card games, games about sports, video games, game shows, puzzles, etc. So what we're trying to show you here is that in Lectora, once you know a couple things about how Lectora works, when you understand actions and you understand variables, you can build any type of game that's going to work with your content. So this is where you start brainstorming. What kind of game best suits your content? What's going to logically fit within your e-learning needs? What are the objectives within your course? How can these games meet those objectives? So the idea we're trying to instill in you now is that anything you want to create in Lectora, you certainly can. You just have to have the wherewithal to do it. So let's start by talking about what are some of the benefits or advantages to using games or building games within your e-learning content. So why should we use games? First and foremost, games are fun. They're engaging. They're exciting. So there's a good chance that if you're incorporating games within your e-learning content, your users are going to be learning from the experience. Games can be reused. The best part about building a game is it might take you a while to develop the first game that you build. You build all of your logic out. You build your actions. You build your variables. But the best part of these is that they can be simply reused. You can save them as templates in Lectora. You can save them as library objects. You can rebuild functionality. You can replace context. So the example we give you here is, let's say the first game you build is a Trivial Pursuit game. A little bit later, a couple months later, you might want to rebuild a different game using that base Trivial Pursuit, but then you can make a Baby Boomer edition. So when you use games, you can utilize them over and over again in different titles on different subject matters. When you build your own games, you want to make sure that you're setting realistic goals. You want your learners to want to win the game. You can control the game and make sure that your goals are meeting your objectives. You can make sure that your students can and will win the game. So this is really going to create a nice, positive learning experience for your end user. Games obviously will create competition. You can create an environment where learners can compete against one another, and then you're likely to attract competitive types to engage. So this is reaching out to those end users who have that competitive nature. This is really going to draw them into your content and make that learning experience that much more exciting. Games obviously use rules and logic. Most games have a set of rules and a basic logic behind them that makes it possible to implement them in Lectora. Later on in this presentation, we'll start talking about some of the logic and some of the rules that you might want to consider when you're building out your own custom games. Games, of course, can be interactive. This is one of the biggest draws or benefits to incorporating games within your content. So, of course, you can simulate the roll of a die, the dealing of a card, writing in a box. All of these interactive objects you can create using buttons, hyperlinks, entry fields. Of course, interactivity is good because this adds another level of engagement. It adds that interactive component where the user is not just going through a page turner. We know enough about e-learning to know that a page turner is not going to be effective e-learning. You need to excite the end user. You need to draw them into the content. So these are some of the benefits to utilizing games within your content. Now there are several ways to integrate games into your Lectora titles, and this is where our presentation is going to focus on these three different areas. First and foremost, you can take advantage of several configurable Flash animation games that are already built into Lectora. These games are contained within your media library. Each game is completely configurable, and scores can very easily be extracted from the games. So you can always keep track of how your end user is doing or performing throughout these games. Scores can be associated with test scores. You can use these for conditional branching, or you can even use these Flash games for evaluation purposes. So these Flash games, I can use them for pre-tests, for final assessments. I might use them as a knowledge check at the end of a chapter, or I might just use them for conditional branching. So based on how the user performs within this game, I might determine whether they should continue forward in the course or whether they should have more time for review. If we take a look here in Lectora's media library, and we'll show you in just a few moments how you can access this in Lectora if you're not. But within your media library, we have a Flash category that contains a number of Flash animations, including almost 20 different Flash games. All of these games can be completely customized with all of your own questions. You can customize the color, the look and feel, so that they're consistent with your content. The best part about utilizing any of these games is that when you insert one of these into your Lectora title, it automatically opens up in a wizard process. So it walks you through that process of adding each question and determining which one is the correct answer. So it's very, very easy to customize these. You don't need to have any Flash programming experience whatsoever. Now just to give you an idea of what some of the games are that are available in this Flash category, we have one of the games available is a golf game. So you can see here, I have the ability to change the name of the game if I want, to change the buttons that are contained within this. So you can really customize this to match some of your own content, maybe put some of your own company branding on it, etc. So here, of course, I can customize each of the questions. I can provide several different answer choices for the learner. And when the user submits their question in this game, they just select that swing button. So all of these games are created for us. I can go through a very simple wizard process that allows me to input in all of my questions and answers. And of course, I can always extract the score using that score in my title to determine what I want the user to do after they take this game. So that's one of the examples of the games available in that library. We also have a categories game, which is very similar to how Jeopardy works. And I'll work with this game in just a few more minutes and show you how you can really customize some of this content. Okay, so you get the idea. Nice thing about all of these games is that they are Flash-based, so they kind of add that whole other engaging element to your content. So those are the games that are available within Lectora, already built for you. Now, a second choice for integrating games into your Lectora titles is to simply import a SWF file. So let's assume you've created, using Flash, you've built your own custom Flash animated game. You can simply drag and drop the SWF file directly into your Lectora title. Now, if this is a native Flash animation, so it was built from that FLA file, that Flash file, you can also use what we call Flash commands to communicate to that Flash animation. And again, in just a few more minutes, I'm going to go into a little bit more detail on how these flash commands can be utilized within your title. If you're someone who doesn't know how to program in Flash, you don't have that resource available to you, but you might want to consider creating some more customized Flash games aside from the 20 that we give you within Lectora. This is a good website. This is a good resource to jot down. This is a site where you can purchase animated games. You can make them customized, and you can include them within your content. So just a resource, some food for thought if you ever want to look into some more customized Flash games for some of your content. Again, I apologize for my voice. We're trying to make it throughout the end of this presentation. Now, the third element we have, and this is where we'll spend the second half of our presentation, is you can build games in Lectora. They're not Flash-based, so you don't need any Flash programming knowledge. And using actions and variables in Lectora, you can build games that are completely customized to meet your own needs. You don't need Flash. You don't need programming skills. You need a good plan of attack. So you need to know what the game is you want to build, how you want to build it, what the rules are of the game, what the logic is, etc. So we're going to mention some of these once we get towards the later half of this presentation. Now, one thing I want to point out to you, if you're building custom games in Lectora, so you're not using Flash, you're not using any of the Flash games that are built for you, you have to be very familiar with actions and with variables, okay, because that's how the games are built within Lectora. You use a series of actions and you use a series of variables to keep track of everything the learner is doing within that particular game. So of these three different ways to integrate games into your Lectora title, let's talk about how we can take more advantage of the games that are first already built for you within Lectora. Then we'll move down and we'll talk about how you want to set up games that you're going to build completely from scratch using Lectora only. First and foremost, there are three ways that you can add these games that are all found within Lectora's Media Library Organizer. There's three ways you can add them to your title. The first option, you can select the Add Animation icon that's available from your toolbar. When the Animation Properties window opens, we can simply select Import from Media Library. The second option, you can choose from the Media Library Organizer icon on the toolbar. This will open up that window that you saw earlier. And from the Flash category, you can select the game that you'd like to insert and then work through it within the wizard. And the third option is you can always go to your Tools menu and simply select the Media Library Organizer from there. So those are the three different ways to access the games that are already built for you and contained within the Media Library. Now, the second option, if we're working with games in Lectora, we told you that if you had a Flash animation, so if you had a Swift file that was a Flash animated game, you can simply drag and drop it into Lectora. So what we want to talk about at this point is if you're using a Flash game that was created natively in Flash, so it was built from an FLA file, or if you're using one of the games contained within Lectora's Media Library, we can apply several what we call Flash commands to these animations. Now, if you take a look here, this is a list of Flash commands that we have. Flash commands are just special actions. We can think of them as being special actions within Lectora that allow you to communicate directly to these Flash animated games. So you can see some of these commands are very obvious. They go to frame, go to next frame. So you can simply navigate to specific places within that Flash animation. But then you've got some that are set variable and get variable. And these are what we're going to work with in just a moment to show you that if, for example, I'm using a Flash game that I've incorporated from the Media Library in Lectora, it makes sense that I'm going to want to extract the user's score from that game. I don't want to just offer a game. I need to know how the user performs within that game. Okay, then I need to know how they perform. I need to be able to extract their score. That's where these Flash commands come into play. because if you have a Flash animated game within your content, using these Flash commands allows you to extract the information from your end user that you're going to be looking for. If you take a look at the example on my page bubble, I have a Flash animation that's set up on the page, and I have two very simple Flash commands that are set up, one on each of these buttons, on my play button and my stop button. So if you take a look, the action that I've executed on this play button is the following. When the user clicks play, we're executing a Flash command for this target animation called Wheel of Fortune, and we're simply setting the command to play. So when I click play, notice the animation starts to play. Now, when I hover over the stop button, you can see that the action that we've animated here, or that we've executed here, is a simple Flash command called stop. So this is a very easy look, kind of giving you an idea of how these Flash commands work. These special actions communicate directly to any animation that was natively created in Flash. So let's take a look at how we can apply these Flash commands to a game that we've included within our title that was from Lectora's media library. So remember, this is a Flash animated game. It's available for you at any time in Lectora's media library. So what I've done here is when the user plays the game, I want to extract their score and simultaneously display it outside of this game and display it on my page level. So as my learner goes through and answers some of these questions, now you can see that in this Flash game, the way that this game is already built, it's already built to display the score within the animation itself. But what we're doing, just to show you how these Flash commands work, is to actually display the score outside on the page level. So if I answer a second question here, you can see again what I'm doing is I'm just extracting a variable from inside of this Flash animation that contains that learner score, and I'm simply displaying it on the page level in Lectora. You'll notice here that the way we set up this game is that once the learner has scored at least 1,000 points, they're eligible to move forward and access that final assessment. So the greatest thing about your games in Lectora is you can apply any number of conditions that you want to them. So based on your learning objectives, you can use those objectives to determine what conditions you want within these games. So let's take a look in Lectora and see how this functionality was actually created here. And if you do have any audio on your line, we've got some audio coming through, so please mute your own microphones if you can. That would be much appreciated. All right, now let's take a look at my screen. In my Lectora title, you can see here I have my Flash animation called Categories. Now, as I was discussing earlier, where I found this Categories game was from our media library. So when I launched that media library, there's a category here called Flash. This has a number of Flash animations, but it also has about 20 different games that you can very easily insert into your Lectora title. Let me choose a different one since I've already got that in here. And again, when you insert any of these games, it walks you through this very easy to use wizard process. So you go step through step, you input all your questions and your answers, and it creates a nice Flash game for you. So very easy to do that. So that's where I found this Categories game. Now, what I'd like to do on this page level is using some simple Flash commands, I'd like to extract the learner's score and display it on the page level. So before I can do that, I have to determine what the variables are that are built into this Flash game. So I don't know what variable name is contained in this category, so I don't know what's really holding on to that score. So the first thing I can do is go to my Help menu. I can choose the Help content, and from the search field, I might just type in the word Flash and hit Enter. And the very first document that pulls up, it's called Specifying Your Flash Animation Parameters. What this document has within it is if I scroll down, notice it's simply labeling all the Flash animations that are available within Lectora. So if I scroll down to the one called Categories, because that's the game that I've used, that's the game that I have on my page, you'll notice here there are 3 variables contained within that game. There's a variable called Score, which is the number of questions answered correctly. There's a variable called Percentage, which is the percentage of questions answered correctly. And then there's a variable called Points, which is the actual number of accumulated points. So within this one flash animation game, I have 3 choices of what I might want to extract from the learner. So I've determined that what I want to actually display on the page level is this variable here called points, because this is going to be that 400 points, that 600 points, etc. So once you're armed with this information, this is the variable that I need to pull out of that flash animated game. Once you have this knowledge, we're going to come back to our page, and on the page level, I'm going to add one action here. Because I want this to display as the learner is going through the game, I want this to update simultaneously, I'm going to set this action trigger to on timer. I'll set the timer interval to every 1 second, and for my action, I'm simply going to choose this one here called Flash Command. My target will simply be that Categories game that I've got on my page level, and the command I'm looking to use here is the one called Get Variable. The variable I'm looking to get from this flash animation is the one called Points. This is what we just saw. We just read that in the help documentation. Now, the way this action really works, it's kind of like a get and set in one swoop, in one action, because we're saying, let's get that flash variable called Points, and let's set it to a Lectora variable that I already have created. So what we can do here is, if you don't have a variable created that you wanted to use, we can create a new variable that's available in Lectora, and I might want to just call this my category score variable. And I think I've already got one of those, so I'll call this category score 1. So all we're saying at this point is, let's pull out that flash variable of points, that's the variable from the flash, and let's set that value equal to our Lectora variable called category score 1. Once I've executed that action, the next action is going to be to display it on the page level. So I'll add one more action to the page. I'll set this up as an on timer, and I'll simply choose the action to change the contents of a text block that I have on my page level called X-score. This is just a text block. It's just a placeholder that I have on the page. The new content that I'm looking to choose here is that variable that we just created called category score 1, because now that variable contains the actual value from the flash animation. Now at this point, when I put this page in preview mode, notice that we have this set on an on timer. So every 1 second, based on how the user is performing within this game, this value is going to update accordingly. So you can see that updating as the user goes through. Every 1 second, this is being updated, and your score is being displayed on the actual page level. Now, of course, you can already see the score built into this flash game. This is just to show you how easy it is to execute those flash commands. So again, just as a review, that first action, all we were doing was pulling that flash variable called points out of the animated game and setting it to a Lectora variable that we created called category score 1. You know, if you're familiar with Lectora variables, once you have a Lectora variable that's built into your title, you can now use this anywhere you want. I can create conditional actions anywhere I want that refers to this variable that simply contains the user's score for this particular game. So that's where I can start creating conditional actions where if the learner had a score of 1,000 or 3,000, allow them access to final assessment. Or if they have a score that's lower than that, send them back for more review, etc. So that's where, using flash commands, you can really get the most out of all the Flash games that are either built into Lectora's media library or custom Flash games that you've added to Lectora. Now, the next part of this presentation, we want to start talking about moving away from those Flash animated games and building games in Lectora from scratch. So this is where we start to say to ourselves, okay, I don't want to use those Flash animations. I know there's about 20 games already built for me in Lectora's media library, but I want to create something custom, something that really matches and is consistent with my particular content. Now, before we talk about some of the things you want to think about, some of the things you need to think about that goes into your game making, take a look at the note that's on the bottom of my page here. One of the benefits of creating your own custom games within Lectora, kind of staying away from the Flash animation side of things, is what if you're creating content that's going to be used on your iDevices? So I'm creating e-learning content for my iPhone, or that's going to be accessible via my iPad. We know that these iDevices, they don't work with Flash. So if I was to use any of those Flash animated games, those games are not going to work if my content is being accessed on these types of devices. So one of the benefits to building your own custom games in Lectora, since you're building them with Lectora actions and Lectora variables and objects, they'll work on any platform that your course is being delivered. That's a big benefit to building some of your own custom games. Let's talk about some of the things that you need to think about when you start building your own games within Lectora. First and foremost, what does your game need? The first thing you want to think about is, how is your game going to begin? Do you begin with a dice roll, a card flip, etc.? What about your tracking system? As the user goes through the game, are you using points to track the user's progress? Are you using a number system? Are they gaining dollars? Or what about position? Are you setting up some type of game board as the user navigates forward? When they reach the end of the game board, is that how they win, etc.? Your end result is also important to think about as well. What's the goal here? Think about your learning objectives. How can you tie these learning objectives into your end goal? Best thing about your games, you never want to forget that whole idea of instructional design. You want your game to be relevant. You want it to have a purpose. So these are the things that you need to start thinking about if you're going to create your own custom game content. Staying organized. This is a really important aspect to developing your own custom games. Plan before you build. Have a great idea. It's almost you have to storyboard your game before you build it in Lectora. Create a flow chart. When you're developing your content in Lectora, label everything. When you develop games in Lectora, they use a number of actions, of variables. So you want to make sure everything is named so you're not seeing image 1 through 500. You have specific names for these objects. It's going to make developing that so much easier. Use your groups. Grouping different objects keeps your Title Explorer organized, makes it a lot easier to show and hide different elements of that game. And of course, use your action groups. When you create games, actions are used because that's what's triggering all of your logic. So if you create action groups, again, it's a lot easier to keep that Title Explorer organized. Let's think about your logic. Every custom game you build in Lectora has its own set of logic that's built into it. So start out by mapping your scenarios. Make sure you understand Lectora, and more importantly, understand some of your limitations. You have to be familiar with Lectora first before you can start developing your own custom game. You need to know what actions are available to you. You need to know what functionality is available to you. Because the last thing you want to do is plan an entire game, start to finish, develop it all out, storyboard it all out, only to sit down and start developing it and to realize that you don't have that specific functionality built into the application. So you need to understand your logic first. Make sure that what you want to do in the game is possible within Lectora. Next big piece here is understanding your variables in Lectora. We mentioned earlier that in order to create your custom games, you have to be very familiar with actions and with variables. So things you're going to use your variables for. Your variables are what's storing the user's score. This is what's keeping track of the user's progress throughout all of this content. Your variables are also keeping track of the number of attempts. So you can build logic into your game that determines the user has 3 attempts for this game. They can try this 3 times or 4 times, etc. Variables can allow you to personalize your game. So you might have your student type their name into an entry field. And that entry field submits their name into the game. It gives it a nice personalized touch. Variables are what allow you to generate random numbers. This is a huge component when you're building your game. If you're rolling a dice, you want to randomize what side, what numbers that dice is going to land on, etc. Performing conditional actions based on the user's performance in a game. What do you want the learner to do next? If the learner completes a game or wins the game, send them to the final assessment. If the learner loses the game, send them back to the chapter for more review. So conditional actions are a big part of the outcome of your game. Second piece, again, we said you have to be familiar not only with variables, but with actions as well. As we mentioned, you're using conditional actions here. Conditional actions are simply based on your variable values. You're using action groups. You're copying and pasting actions. Copying and pasting in Lectora, for most of you, probably already aware, this is a big benefit because when you're building your games, it's going to be a lot of the same logic repeated. So a lot of those actions, you'll be able to copy and paste and modify a couple elements of those actions. When you're using actions, you can use the this object target. That's going to make things a lot easier when you're applying actions directly to an object. Let's say a button, let's say an image. The user's clicking on it. It's a lot easier to trigger that action when you're using that this object target. Okay, and that takes us back to the beginning there. Now, when you start building your own custom games in Lectora, remember, we're not using Flash, we're using Lectora components only, actions, variables, objects, etc. You don't want to forget what we call the cool stuff. If you're building unique games, don't forget about some of the fun Lectora objects that you can use. These add an extra element that can often make the game seem much more sophisticated. So these are simple elements that get overlooked a lot. The first thing up at the top here, we have simple progress bar with the move to action. Don't forget about your transparent buttons. It's taking a game that can be pretty elementary and it's making it look much more sophisticated. Don't forget your sound effects. Using timers, progress bars, and of course your time tests. So we can add that extra element within your game. Or the user could be racing the clock. And then of course your randomized variables. And if you take a look here, when I roll the dice, first time I roll it, I get a 2. When I roll it again, I get a 6. When I roll it a third time, I get a 1, etc. So if you take a look here, I want to show you the action that was utilized on this button. So you can see this button I have here called roll. Take a look at the action that we programmed in there. I'm going to show you some specific examples of a game that we've used this functionality in before. So if you take a look at what's happening here, we've created our own custom variable. So we simply labeled dice1. And when the user clicks that button, we're modifying that variable to this specific value here. It says rand, and then in parentheses, it's 1, 6. The way this action works is that each time this action gets executed, we're setting that variable called dice1 to a random value between numbers 1 and 6. Based on the value of that variable, we're simply displaying the specific dice image. So if dice1 variable is equal to 5, I'm triggering an action on the page that's showing that number 5 dice image, and it's also displaying that variable value in a text block on the page. So you can see where it says number roll 5, and then it's got the associated graphic on the page level as well. This value, random value, is going to be used time and time again when you're developing your games. Because let's think any time you roll a dice, it's a random roll. What number is it going to land on? Well, the choices are 1 through 6, and it's just going to randomize each time that action is executed. Excuse me. Now let's take a look at an example here of a custom game that we've created, a custom tic-tac-toe game. And here are the things that you want to think about. This is what I told you. Within this presentation, we want to really provide you with a good framework. What are the things to think about before you actually sit down in Lectora and start developing this custom content? So first and foremost, we see this, how will the game work? Well, let's define it. And if you take a look at this pop-up window, these are questions that you want to ask yourself before you develop any one of your games. This can be applied to any custom game that you want to create. So here are some things you want to ask yourself. What type of game best suits my need? What is my content about? What's my subject matter? What are my learning objectives? How am I going to use the game? Am I using the game as a pre-assessment, as a final assessment, maybe just as a knowledge check, or maybe just to add some interaction or to add some engagement to my course? Will it correspond to a scored quiz or test, or is it just for review purposes? Do I need to ask a lot of questions or just a few? Do these questions need to be randomized? Are there categories of information to review or just a general set? What are the gameplay rules? What is the instructional methodology? For your gameplay rules, you always want to make sure that you're delivering those to the learner as well. So if you're offering a game, you tell them the instructions of the game, what's the end result of the game, etc. When presenting students with questions, what happens when they answer them correctly? What happens when they answer them incorrectly? So all of this logic needs to be built into the game structure. The infrastructure of the game needs to be determined before you even sit down behind your computer and start developing that game in Lectora. What is the order of operations? And does the student make all of the choices, or is there a simulated opponent? So with something like tic-tac-toe, the learner's playing against an opponent, whether it's the computer, whether it's another made-up character that goes along with your content. These are all of the things that you need to think of first and determine before you actually sit down and develop this game in Lectora. So if you take a look at the tic-tac-toe example, we have how will the game work? And here we've briefly defined how this game is going to work. Users, or the students, always represented with O. Student selects a square, it answers the question, etc., etc. So it's playing against the computer, which is represented with an X. So if the student gets the question incorrect, we're going to display an X in that particular square. What's the necessary framework? Here's where you ask yourself, okay, well, what kind of graphics do I need? What kind of text, buttons, etc.? This is where you start thinking about the visual representation of the game. So for tic-tac-toe, we would need a grid. We would need 9 X's, 9 O's, at least 9 questions, right? Because they're clicking on each of the 9 squares, and each square is going to offer them a question. How will you keep track? This is a game. Do I want to keep track by a point system? Do I want a score system? Number of questions answered correctly, etc. So there's a lot of thought that goes into the initial framework of creating a game. And if you take a look, I have an example of our tic-tac-toe game that we can show you here. And you can see the way we've set up this game, this is just a simple example here, where the learner is going to click on one of the squares, which would launch a question here on the right. And we've just kind of created a standard function here so you can see the idea. And when the learner answers the question, depending on how they've answered that question, whether they get the question correct or incorrect, depends on if they win over that square or not. Now you'll notice that we can build out this any way we want. So notice at the bottom, I could launch question feedback, so the learner could have feedback as they go throughout this game as well. So it doesn't have to just be straightforward question answering all of these questions. You can certainly add as much feedback and can really customize the look and feel of this game as you need to. As you know, Lectora has a number of standard question types that I can be utilizing here. True and false questions, multiple choice questions, fill in the blank, etc. So all of that can be tied in to your overall game. You need to determine how you want the users to access the game, how the user wins the game, and all of the logic that's built into it, so from start to finish. So those questions that we went over a moment ago, these questions are a great resource for you to go back to and say, okay, I want to create a custom game. I don't want to use a Flash game. I want to build it my own in Lectora. Let's start thinking about the game itself. So start by running through these questions and asking yourself, what type of game is best going to meet my students' needs? Let's think about the learning objectives that are associated with my course. You don't want to offer a game that doesn't make sense, that's not connected to the material in any way. Okay, you need your game to make a connection to that material. Games will be more interactive, they'll certainly be more engaging for the end user, but you need to make sure there's a connection, because otherwise it's just a useless activity. So you need a purpose for any game that you're building into your content. Now another example here of a custom game you may wish to build in Lectora. And here's where we're going to start giving you just some ideas, some food for thought, if you will. You can very easily build a crossword puzzle, again, where the learner can click on one of the options, whether they're going to go across or down, and we can present questions to them. Here's a simple fill in the blank type question. Of course, we can always provide feedback along with those questions as well. Notice we mentioned before, entry fields. This is causing the user more interaction. It's allowing them to interact with this game. They're answering multiple choice questions. They're answering fill-in-the-blank questions, etc. And the way this crossword puzzle is working is that when the learner answers these questions correctly, you'll notice we're just triggering actions to display the letters within the actual frame. So we're just triggering some very simple show actions here. So crossword puzzles, and keep in mind what I mentioned earlier in the presentation. Any custom games that you start building in Lectora, very, very easy to save these games and use them for a number of different titles in lots of different subject matter, because the framework of the game is mainly the same. Okay, you can always change out the context of the game, but the framework is going to be the same. So whether you save the game as a Lectora template, whether you save the game as a Lectora library object, very, very easy, excuse me, very easy to reuse this content, okay? So yes, there is a lot of logic that's going to be built into it. There's a lot of actions, there's a lot of variables. But once you have that created, think about how easy it is to implement this in any other title that you're going to develop in the future. And I know this isn't such a subtle hint that we've got here, but this crossword puzzle is a good plug for our 2012 Lectora User Conference. So if you want more information, go to our website. So that's a shameless plug that we've built into our presentation here. Now the last idea, or kind of thought process, if you will, idea, food for thought, is you can create custom games that are modeled after some of your favorite game show or your television shows, okay? So Wheel of Fortune, Jeopardy. You can create games that are familiar to the end user, but they're customized with all of your own content. So that makes it exciting too. If the user's familiar with Wheel of Fortune, they know how the game works, and they're using it to interact more with the content that you're trying to teach them. So let's take a look at an example of the spin the wheel idea that we have here. And this is an example of Lectora and how you can achieve an animated look, but you're not using Flash, you're not using JavaScript. So what I want to show you here is how we can create this functionality where we're simply using hide and show actions to create this look of a spinning wheel. So let me go ahead and show you what I mean. When I select spin wheel, you're going to now that functionality, we're not showing you a fully incorporated game here. We're just kind of showing you an element that you might build into a game. But that functionality looks like a Flash animation, but it's not. It's all custom built in Lectora, and it's simply a series of actions that are showing different images of this wheel, and it's showing them within a 1/10 of a second delay. So we've set that up. We've created randomized variables so that each time the user would select spin the wheel, excuse me, each time the user would select spin the wheel, it's randomizing how many times that wheel is spun around. We can spin it 2 to 5 times, so how many times that wheel actually goes around. And all we're doing is showing a different graphic. And we're showing it kind of like a flip book, where we're showing that graphic with a 1/10 of a second delay. So it looks like the wheel is animated, but really it's just a series of actions within Lectora. Let me show you what this looks like in Lectora. So take a look here at my Title Explorer on the left-hand side. Now, of course, what are some of the things that we mentioned earlier? When you start creating games and your different game elements, take advantage of your groups. We've got a couple different groups here. We have a start group with a series of images. I'll get to that in a second. We have a wheel image group with another set of graphics that are available here. Now, the way that this is working, and this title is a 2-page title, so you see the user starts on this page. And let's take a look at how we set up this spin wheel button. If you take a look, some of the actions that we've built on this button, notice what we've set up here. We created a variable called max spin. And again, this is where I wanted to show you how you would use one of these randomized values. We've set this variable to a random value between 2 and 5. This determines how many times the wheel goes around. So the wheel could go around 2 times, or it could go around 5 times, 3 times, 4 times, etc. So each time the user would click that spin wheel, it's going around a different amount of time. So that's what's creating that realistic simulation. Okay, it's not always going around 2 times. It's a realistic game, because if you were really playing Wheel of Fortune, I might spin once a little harder, it goes around 5 times. I might spin the next time a little softer, it's only going to go around 2 times. The first thing that we're doing here is determining how many times that wheel goes around. Then I have another action here that's simply setting a variable that we've created called stop, and it's determining a random value, and this determines when excuse me, when on what number or what wheel graphic the image should actually stop on. So are you going to stop showing the wheel image 1, showing the wheel image 2, 3, 4, 5, all the way up to 10? Okay, so how many times the wheel goes around, we can determine that. Which graphic the wheel randomly stops on, that's what's determined here with this stop variable. Okay, if you look on the wheel page, excuse me, I'm sorry for my voice. I know it must be such a pain to have to listen to it. But on the wheel page, now we've got 2 sets of graphics. Now you can see here, I'm just clicking on a graphic, but just the sequence that I'm clicking on, it looks like it's animating because they're in the same position on the page, and it's just showing a different portion of that wheel up at the top. So we have 2 sets of groups here. We have our start group, and then we have our wheel image group. Now they're comprised of the same graphics, but the logic behind this is that the start group is showing the appropriate wheel image that it just landed on. So if it had just landed on wheel 2, the next time I go to spin it, it needs to be showing this particular graphic. So again, this is what's building in that realistic component to your game, where each time the user clicks spin wheel, it's not always going to be on this particular portion of the wheel, if that logic makes sense. Because, you know, if I'm playing a game, realistically, I'm going to spin the wheel several times throughout that game. And when I go to spin it the next time, I want to see it set to the last one that it just stopped on. So if it just stopped on 700, when I go to spin it again, I want it to be listed here on 700. So these are all the little elements of a game that you've got to think about. Is there a lot of logic that goes into building these custom Lectora games? Absolutely. Do you need to understand variables and actions in order to build these games? 100% yes, you do. Now, we have other options, as you saw. You can take advantage of the Flash animated games that are built into Lectora. If someone builds you a custom Flash animation, you can certainly import that into your title as well. But if you want to create your own custom content, remember, this is not built on Flash. So any iDevice that your content is being viewed on, it's going to work. No matter what platform it is, it's going to work. It's going to be accessible. So a lot of benefits. You can customize it to meet your particular needs, your particular learning objectives, etc. Now, with this presentation, again, what we really wanted to stress to you today is start thinking about what goes into a game. Start thinking about the pre-planning process, how you start building your game, what kind of game do you want, what are the rules of the game, etc. Hopefully we've given you some ideas. You saw a couple examples here of some of the custom games we've built. But keep in mind, this is a very unlimited field here. You can build any kind of game. They can be as simple or as sophisticated as you really want them to be. Now, what I'd like to do here, I mentioned this morning when we started our presentation that all of these sessions are archived, they're recorded, and they'll be available in just a couple of days on our website. So when you go to trivanis.com, the top right-hand corner, there's a little hyperlink called Webinars. So you can click on that. You can access all of these archived sessions. If you're not familiar with Inspiration Wednesdays, if this is your first session that you're joining, we have so many other sessions that are archived out there. Definitely worthwhile taking a look.